Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Cozy Mystery Mingle. So excited. This is our first interview for May, and we are lucky enough to have Barbara Ross. Hi, Barbara.
Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Very good. I'm so thrilled. Barbara is like the most multifaceted, talented, impressive author that we have had on this channel ever. And I've interviewed other people. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I sincerely doubt
No,
that.
you are. I looked at every time I looked at more stuff, I was like, wow. And I had to double check. I'm like, did I spell this wrong? Is this the right person? But yeah, it's all you.
Yeah, so my name is Barbara Ross, and I am the author of the Maine Clambake Mysteries. There are 12 novels and 6 novellas in the series. The most recent came out just a week ago, Tuesday, Torn Asunder, the 12th book.
Yay. And so, fun fact, I was reading up about Barbara's background, and we both are minimalists that don't have a lot of decorations and knickknacks, except for my YouTube background, right?
Yes, I was feeling a little weird about having this in the background.
No, it's like if you don't have a background, because I started out where I just had a white wall, and I was like, this looks so clean and crisp. And people were like, this looks really generic and weird. So, and very sterile, right? Like a hospital.
Right.
So then I just, this is it, this corner of knickknacks.
Well, that's what I was going to say. This is it. It's not like I don't have stuff. I have stuff, like I'm a normal human being, but my brother always says, and he just moved, so he's probably saying it even more right now, that we're the first generation in the history of the earth that spends more time and energy worrying about how we're going to get rid of stuff than how we're going to acquire stuff. So you have millions of years of scarcity.
Yeah.
And then from World War II on, it's like, what is all this stuff doing in my house? And it just accelerates. So, but my mother-in-law, who we're going to talk about, I think, because she ran a bed and breakfast in Boothbay Harbor, Maine, that was part of the inspiration of this for the series. Mm-hmm. She had a hoardy tendency. Oh. So having cleaned out her houses many times over many years, that sort of gave me the anti-stuff attitude.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, so all of my daily life, I read all those things about people who have to look for stuff and take a lot of time to clean. I just feel like I'm naturally more efficient, don't you? You have to do all that stuff.
Yeah, I do. And I also sort of feel like, passing it along when you're done with it is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So another fun fact is both of our series are set in Maine, and it has the lowest crime rate, but we've both chosen that as the state to put our murders in. How did you are obviously in Maine. Is that how you chose Maine as the?
Well, in many ways, it is how I chose Maine, because, well, I can tell you the story, but a friend of mine who was also a Maine crime author, the late Lee Waite, had mentioned to me that her daughter had her wedding reception on a private island off the coast of Maine that did a family clambake. So that was sort of the genesis of the series. But Maine has, going back to Murder, She Wrote, going back to Mary Roberts Reinhardt, Maine has a really robust crime writing community. I have no idea why. And I used to say that my friends murdered more people in Maine every year than were actually murdered in Maine. Unfortunately, with the mass shooting in Lewiston this year, I can't say that for 2023. But in the Maine, it is absolutely true. Maine is a very safe place, but a lot of people seem to die in these little Maine towns.
Yes, all of them. Well, tell us about Torn Asunder. Who gets killed there and what's going on?
So Torn Asunder is the 12th and last book in the series. So the series started with a novel called Clammed Up. That's the first book in the series. And it took place on the eve of a wedding in a private on this private island where my family, my fictional family, the Snowdens, run a clam bake.
Mhm.
So in the 12th book, I wanted to come back to that. So many things have happened in the interim. And the old family mansion on the island has burned down and been rebuilt. But it opens again at a wedding reception, this time for friends of my sleuth, Julia Snowden's wedding. And a mysterious man turns up and drops dead at the rehearsal dinner. And Julia assumes it's had to have been a massive allergic reaction to shellfish, which,
Mhm.
as someone who runs a clam bake, that's something she worries about all the time. And I'd never used it in 18 previous stories, so I thought it was about time. But it turns out that neither the groom's side nor the bride's side actually claim him, and that in fact it wasn't an allergic reaction. So that's what drives the story and sends it forward. It's kind of a quasi locked room mystery, not in a locked room, but with a limited cast in a mansion on a private island during a terrible storm when they're cut off from the internet and the mainland.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds just like Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, or whatever
Right.
it's titled right now.
Right. Very inspired by that. Right.
Mhm. Nice. And so this is book 12 in the series. And so can they jump into this without reading books 1 through 11?
So people can and definitely have, based on Goodreads reviews and NetGalley's reviews. There are definitely people on there saying this is the first one I read. And no question, the mystery is complete and in itself, and you'll understand who the characters are. But many people, since this is the last one in the reviews, have recommended reading more of the books or even reading from the beginning so that you're more invested in the characters by the time this final story rolls around.
Okay. So I guess if you're just jumping into 12, what would be good for readers to like know the basics?
So the series is about a amateur sleuth, Julia Snowden, who in the very first book returns from her venture capital job in New York City to save her family's clambake business. Her parents have started the clambake in order to maintain and keep in the family the private island that her mother's once wealthy family owned. So Julia lands back in a hometown where she'd never really expected to live again. And where she'd never really felt like she fit in, and that she'd left to go to prep school in ninth grade and never, aside from summers when she worked at the Clambake, returned to. So it's the 12 books kind of follow her journey as she finds a new life in this new town and decides what's important to her.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And I know this is a silly question, but what is a clam bake? Is this term like a barbecue? Like, is it a gathering? Is it a dish? Like, what is that? What does it mean?
Okay. So, no, clam bake means different things in different parts of the country.
Mm-hmm.
Maine Clambake is twin lobsters, so two lobsters, soft-shelled clams called steamers,
Mm-hmm.
an ear of corn, a potato, and in my particular fictional instantiation, a hard-boiled egg and an onion that are cooked over an open fire, open wood fire under saltwater-soaked tarps. So that's kind of the main meal.
Mm-hmm.
And at the Snowden Family Clambake, they call it a dining experience. So you watch the meal being cooked, you can explore their private island. You start with clam chowder, which is classic with a New England clambake, or lobster bake, as some people call it. And you end with blueberry grunt and vanilla ice cream. And it's sort of, there's a whole sort of, I don't know, you eat outdoors on picnic tables or in a dining pavilion that's open on three sides. And it's sort of a whole experience. And you get a ride to the island is also a guided tour on the tour boat that brings guests over. And then you get a ride back at the end.
Oh, wow. All right. And so in this book, the Snowden Family Clambake. Oh, did my camera just die?
I can't see you.
That was weird. Well, you can answer while I try to figure out my camera. So the Snowden Family Clambake is a popular tourist destination restaurant. What else do they serve there?
That's it. Every single day, which is real. So twice a day, the tour boat brings people over. And when my agent first talked to me about this series, he positioned it as a cozy culinary series. So I kind of am like, have agents and publishers in New York ever been north of Westchester County? Because a clambake is the same meal every single time. So in my original proposal, I didn't include any recipes. I sort of kind of wrote around it. And my agent indeed sent the manuscript out to a few publishers, and then he caught on and he asked me for recipes. So in the initial proposal, my husband developed a recipe for clam chowder, and I chased my mother for weeks asking for her recipe for blueberry grunt. And she finally had to confess that it was James Beard's recipe for blueberry grunt, so I couldn't use it. So another Maine author friend, Kate Flora, gave me her mother's recipe. So those are kind of the two recipes from the clambake that went out with the initial proposal. When it came back and the series was purchased by Kensington and I needed to come up with recipes for every book, I decided that if you own an ice cream parlor, you don't eat ice cream every day. And clearly these characters don't eat lobster steamers, a potato, ear of corn, an onion, and an egg every day. So I decided that the recipes would be built of ingredients that were local and seasonal. There would always be one lobster recipe. And the rest of it would just depend on where the characters went and what they did and what meals they ate in the course of the story.
All right. And so for you personally, what's your favorite seafood?
So that's a hard one, but I would have to say shrimp. And I have access to two wonderful kinds of shrimp. Here in Maine, we have these teeny tiny, very sweet shrimp that unfortunately haven't had a season in, I'm thinking, maybe 7 years. They're probably gone, but you can still get them from Canada, where the water is colder and where they're allowed to be fished. And when I'm in Key West, where we live in the winter, we have Key West pinks, which are just the most wonderful, very different from Maine or Canadian shrimp, East Coast Canadian shrimp. They're quite large and absolutely delicious. So I think that's my favorite.
Oh, great. And you're lucky enough, you have what all of us women dream about, a husband who likes to cook, cooks for you.
Loves to cook. Yes, okay. Absolutely.
And so does Bill do any of the recipes for the other books?
So he does all of the recipes except he doesn't bake, which I worked on him for 12 books for 13 years trying to get him interested in baking, but it never happened. But luckily, my grandmother in 1984 left me a book of her recipes. Excuse me. So most of the baked goods come from that. But what we do is, as I'm drafting the book, I look at what people are eating in the course of the book. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, do you need a glass of water?
Yeah, hold on. Oh, goodness. Okay. I look at what people are eating in the course of the book, and then he develops the recipes. So I tell him it's a fancy meal in a restaurant, or it's a pickup barbecue,
Mm-hmm.
or it's a casual lunch, or it's sort of the family meal that they serve to the people who work at the clam bake between breakfast and dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes off and develops the recipes. And then we test them. We have to test them, of course. So when we're testing them, we kind of throw adjectives at one another, like, oh, briny, oh, chewy, oh, yeah, this and that. And that's ultimately ends up in the description in the book.
Nice. And so you have like the ultimate lifestyle. Your husband, he cooks all the meals, right?
Pretty much. I always say that I when we entered our marriage, we probably shared the cooking 50-50 when we were bringing up our kids when they were young. But we kind of reached that age in middle school and high school where somebody's out every single night of the week. So at that point, my husband started making kind of big meals, like multiple big meals on Sunday afternoons while he watched football. And then that was sort of there all week. And he became more and more interested in cooking in a very kind of informed way. And as he waded in, I kind of backed out. And, now I do family favorites, like signature dishes for holidays, and that's it.
Hmm. Nice. And so, people are probably wondering, does Bill have a single brother who also likes to cook?
He has 3 brothers. They are all wonderful cooks. We
Wow.
used to go on family camping trips where he has 2 sisters as well, where
Uh-huh.
people would get very competitive about the cooking, which only benefited all of us in a wonderful way. Only one of them is single.
All right. Well, so is everybody in Maine? Your whole extended family?
No, most people are in Massachusetts, which is where Bill and I lived until 2017. But in the late 80s, my mother-in-law shocked us all. She was a retired math teacher. She came up to Maine with a girlfriend, and I know these 2 women very well, and I am quite sure that they were stopping at every bookstore, tourist trap, gift shop, all the way down. And it got too late for them to get home. So they went down the peninsula to Boothbay Harbor, Maine, and they spent the night at a bed and breakfast there. And when they got up in the morning, the owner was sort of bemoaning the fact that he needed to sell out. And my mother-in-law said, I'll buy it. And it was a shock, honestly. She'd never said anything about wanting to be in the hospitality industry. She never said anything about wanting to live in Maine. It was quite a shock. But she was a natural. She was a great cook and a very warm person. We would find these reserved Midwest couples would show up one night, and by the morning they're hugging and kissing goodbye on the porch and promising to exchange Christmas cards. And so she was very, very good at it. And that's what actually my husband and I had camped in Maine before that, but that's what really brought us coming to Maine on a regular basis.
All right. And so how did you come up with the name? And I'm assuming it's fictional, right? Busman's Harbor?
Correct. So, though I'm very open that a lot of the story is based on Boothbay Harbor, Maine, I wanted the ability to move things around and to have streets go in different directions. And, I wanted that fictional ability to add something if I needed it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I named it Busman's Harbor, and the name is actually explained in the second book, Boiled Over, which is one of my favorite. But Maine, has these long rocky peninsulas that extend down from the coast. And so in the story, the island, the railroad goes up sort of the main body of Maine. But in order to, in the late 19th century, serviced what was emerging as the tourist industry when the people first started coming to Maine for vacations. A busman, initially with horses and a carriage, would meet the train and bring people down to the harbor. So that's how it got the name Busman's Harbor. But also as a mystery writer, I liked it because of Dorothy L. Sayre's book, Busman's Holiday. And I liked that whole notion of a busman's holiday in the sense that my characters are the characters that are working their tails off, making sure you have a good vacation. So that's how it got the name.
I'm learning so many new words. Clambake, busman. So let's talk about all the research. You did a ton of research for the Founders Day one, Boiled Over, right?
Yes.
And so can you just share some fun facts that you remember about Maine?
Well, what's fun about it for me is not being from Maine and moving here. And, adulthood, it's not like I went through 5th grade here and got Maine history. So I've had this opportunity to learn all about Maine and by doing research for the books. And Boiled Over, which is kind of the one that includes a fictional history of my fictional town, is the one that really allowed me the most to delve into Maine history. And there are some wonderful books and stories, and I strongly recommend the book called The Lobster Coast by Colin Woodard, which is narrative nonfiction, amazingly readable, and really gives you just a wonderful context for the history of Maine.
Nice. And so how similar and how different is Busman's Harbor versus Portland, Maine?
Oh, well, Portland, where I live, is a city. It's a small city in a small state, but it's definitely, I think 66,000 people. So the suburbs I lived in Boston are bigger than the city I live in Maine, but it's very much an urban environment, especially where I live. I can walk out and go around the corner to a coffee shop or et cetera. So Portland is an actual city and much bigger than my little fictional town of Busman's Harbor. In contrast, Boothbay Harbor, which I think has maybe 20,000 people in the summer, shrinks down to like 3,000 in the winter. So truly a small town.
All right. And so the cover for this book has seagulls on it. Is that on purpose? Like, are they like part of the story or?
Well, actually, each of the books except one has this red lobster boat on it, which is very much, it's not something I ever ask for. They always ask for ideas for the covers, but I love that it's this continuing theme through all the books. And it's always sort of seen in the distance.
I don't think I've ever noticed that. I always notice the seagulls for some reason.
Yeah, you have to look for it. But there are seagulls, I think, on almost all of the covers as well. And no, like every sane human, I hate seagulls. We could call them trash gulls. If you've ever had to have a picnic on a beach, you know what a pain in the neck they are. I do admit to kind of, I'm looking at a seagull right now on the roof of the building next door.
Wow.
I do admit, as you get close to the sea and you begin to smell it, and then you hear the seagulls, I always have an emotional response to that. But up close and personal, no, thank you.
Got it. All right. So let's talk about your amateur sleuth, Julia Snowden. How much is she like you, like a mini Barbara?
So when I began the series, I was hugely conscious that Julia was half my age. And I was always running things by my daughter saying, would you say this? Would you say it that way? And she finally said, well, I wouldn't say it that way, but my NPR listening, Pepto-Bismol swilling cousin Julia, or Julia, as it happens, her cousin Julia would. So that got me to relax and be less conscious about it, be less worried about it. And I do think as the series goes on, Julia and I get closer and closer together, though our lives are very different. And of course, the difference in our ages has also resulted in our lives being very different because we've grown up in different contexts. But I think her voice and emotions come closer and closer to mine as the series goes on. Okay. Which is sort of about me being less conscious and kind of letting go and letting the voice come through.
Mm-hmm. And what do you love about this character that you created?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's that Julia is very practical and determined and logical and no nonsense in how she approaches her life. She's a good boss. She's a good sister and daughter and girlfriend. But she, in spite of those harder, more practical aspects, especially since the books are first person, you can also see and feel the emotions underneath that. She's a very loyal person. She's a very loving person. She's a person who wants to do the right thing whenever she can. And she's a person who cares about other people's emotions. So it's that sort of duality of her that I really enjoy writing.
Very nice. And so who is her sidekick that helps her solve mysteries?
Well, that's a really interesting question. There's a different sidekick in almost every book.
Oh.
So in the book Torn Asunder, the new book, it's her boyfriend, Tom, who is a Maine State Police detective. So kind of the obvious person. And he also figures heavily in the one before it, which is the novella hopped along from the book Easter Basket Murder. But the one before that, hidden beneath, her sidekick is her mom. And the one before that, muddled through, is when she's first getting to know the woman who will become her best friend, Zoe. And there are earlier ones where it's her sister. So it's kind of it's been a rotating one, but given that the larger arc of the series is that Julia's kind of finding her place in this town, finding her adult relationship with her sister, her brother-in-law, her niece, her nephew, her mother, finding friends, finding a love interest, imagining a life, and then making a life happen are very much what the series is about. So it's not surprising that she doesn't have a regular sidekick.
Got it. And so just for future plans, fun fact also about you is you're a tech startup genius. And
hardly.
You are. Before there was Mark Zuckerberg, there was Barbara Ross.
Oh, yeah.
And so is there any plans for you ever to write a tech startup kind of cozy?
That's a really interesting question. When I started the Maine Clambake Mysteries, I was less than 2 years out of my last stint in the business. And it was way too close, way too close. But if I ever did, it would definitely be a comedy.
Okay.
Like a laugh out loud. If I could do a laugh out loud comedy. But I also think other people have perhaps done it better. There are a few tech things in the books. There's a character, Quentin, who is a tech millionaire who appears in several of the books. But I don't know. Maybe I'm still too close.
I mean, your company sold for millions. I mean, you worked at multiple startups, right?
Yeah, 3. Well, 2 startups and a turnaround, which, is similar.
Mm-hmm. And so, any desire to ever do that again?
No. Oh my gosh. The greatest joy of my life is that I don't have to, I always say that for 30 years, I felt like I began every day like I was shot out of a cannon. And
Really?
now I get up when I want to. I drink 2 cups of coffee, which, believe me, I can make a cup of coffee last an hour or more. If
Mhm.
I read the newspapers, I wouldn't give that up for anything.
All right. And well, also, we talked about this. Your mother-in-law had a B&B. Was there ever an idea to start a B&B, Cozy?
Well, there are 2 characters in my books, Fee and V Snug, who run a B&B, and there's no question that everything I know about that business and the mechanics of that business and then financials of that business came from my mother-in-law's experience, no question. And my publisher had suggested at one point that they could be spun off into their own series,
Mm-hmm.
but I was like, how many people can I kill in this poor little Maine town? So I decided not to go for it.
All right. Whatever happened to your mother-in-law's B&B?
So actually, what had happened is that she was very, very good at it.
Mm-hmm.
But as she got into her late 70s and early 80s, all the shopping, all the cooking, all the beds, all the cleaning, and remember, lots of stuff. Remember, I told you that way at the beginning. Just got to be too much, and she was hiring more and more help, and the economics started to kind of not make sense. And so at that point, my husband and I bought it, and we bought a 2-family house in Somerville, Massachusetts, for her to live downstairs in the winter. And then we thought it would be a good way to keep the house in the family. But we had zero interest in running a bed and breakfast. I always say that I would be willing to run a bed and get your own damn breakfast. But the idea of 12 strangers staring at me at 7:00 in the morning is way more than I can even contemplate. And we owned it for 14 years.
Wow.
But after my mother-in-law passed away, we had decisions to make about where we wanted to be. And we eventually decided that small a town was not for us.
Mm-hmm.
So we sold it, and the people who bought it have since put at least $1 million into that,
Wow.
renovating it. And we were never going to do that. So we feel really good that it's somebody else's family home and they're taking care of it, and we're not.
Yeah. Great. So, what are your writing plans then for 2024?
At this point, I don't have any.
Okay.
As I said, Torn Asunder is the last book in the series,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been taking some time off. I have some personal projects that I want to work on. Everyone's like, "Oh, you'll be writing again," and I think that's probably true. As I've said, I wrote for years before I was published or had any hope of being published.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't I continue writing after being published? But at this point, I'm taking some time off. I'm clearing my mind. I do have some ideas, but 2 of them are quite large and daunting. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Okay. Well, that's nice. So, where can readers find you if they want to connect with you? Are you on social media or just a website or?
So I do have a website, maineclambakemysteries.com. I'm
Mhm.
also a regular on a group blog. There are 6 of us called the Wicked Authors, which I recommend. And we all started off as cozy authors.
Mhm.
Since then, and it was called the Wicked Cozy Authors. Since then, 2 of us have moved into historical and 2 have moved into paranormal. And there's been some women's fiction. And so as we've broadened, we've also kind of broadened the book, but is the blog, but is still very much focused on cozy mysteries. And I do recommend it. I am on Facebook. I have a fan page on Facebook. I am on Instagram. Yeah, as Maine Clambake.
Got it. Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this great information and about your book today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great.
Awesome. All right. I will leave all of Barbara's contact information below or the show notes if you're listening on podcasts, and we'll see everyone later.
Thank you.